Pinball Mayhem here. Have you ever been working on a old pinball machine, something that they may not make all the parts for, and you need something that you can't get? Well, on this wood rail, I have a flipper assembly, which I'm missing half of this. I only have one half, and it's pretty slopped out, and I need to come up with a second pair. So I've done some working in the shop and digging around some used parts. I'm going to show you what solution I came up with. A little bit closer look of the mechanism, and looks a little bit like a cowel job with that cotter pin, and there's a lot of slop back and forth, a lot more than I think is acceptable, and that's a little, would be usable. This is held in by 2 set screws on a 2-inch flipper. There's a few different styles, a few different ways they were made. This actually has a metal shoe that snaps into the bottom of the flipper, and then that metal shoe sits on 2 little grooves and a screw hole in there. And you have to look at your game. There's a few different styles. There's one with screws on top, one with a screw on bottom, and a shoe that's welded in. And you want to match it what's on the game. There's also a few different styles of printing on the top. So for this one, I only have this, and I need to pair. I was able to source a couple used shafts with the keys and the proper thread, and they're the right height. And now I have to figure out the links and the ends. Now, this piece seems to be fairly specific, but as I'll show you later, the mechanism will hit at the end here, so the shape of this does not matter. I had some pawls like this off of another game, Paul's Cranks, and I don't need the spring because that's taken care of in the shaft, so I cut that off, and I have 2 cranks pawls that do look different, but they're going to function the same way, same diameter, and the pivot point is at the same spot. Then I focus on these links. Now these are a little bit longer than a normal flipper plunger, but I found I had a couple decent slingshot plungers, and from the hole to center looks to be about the same. The pins are intact in these, and the groove is wide enough to accept my link. I'll leave that there. So for the link, I ended up going to the hardware store and I picked up some 1/2 inch by 1/8 inch bar stock. You don't want sheared, you want bar, because the bar stock is a little stronger, and I like, it's easier to work with, less flexible this way. And I drilled holes in both. I drilled an 1/8 inch hole on this side and a 1/4 inch hole on that side. Now that is bigger than the original one because the original had a smaller pivot point. It's going to be fine. Now the space I mentioned, this is going to extend and hit the end. So that's our stop. Nothing with this. This is just our pivot. I did take the time, and I wanted to file these real good, and didn't even care about filing a little bit too far, because this is thicker than the original one. The original one was, I don't know, 32nd, something like that, 16th. But a little thicker is not going to hurt. It's going to fit on my pivot just fine with there's enough space, and it will fit in here. Plenty of space up and down. You always want a little slop up and down. You don't want anything super tight, because sometimes everything's not aligned perfectly. I did round the corners a little bit on the back. It's not really that big of a deal, because you can see line up the pivot point. There's plenty of room. You want to make sure there's plenty of room. I'll check it before I do final assembly. I did forget something when I was in the shop. There needs to be a little hole. That's for the spring to attach. Unlike the other style that had the spring right on the crank, I do need to drill another 1/8 inch hole in the side. I'm going to knock these apart and drill these holes, and I will come back with what it looks like. Halfway through swapping out these pins, I got the links removed. I have one together, You see, I had to drill that hole. Now the important part is that these two holes are the same distance. They can be off by a little bit, so the easiest way is when you're drilling them to clamp these two together with a vice grips, and then drill one side, drill the other. Sometimes two vice grips will keep them from pivoting on you. So this is one together, ready to go to the next step. Now, before I put this in, I thought some people might want measurements. Port measurement is centered here to the end and center to center, because if you have that too long, it's going to reduce your flipping travel. If you have it too short, it's going to make it too long. And this hole is really not critical that they're both lined up, because that's just where the spring hooks in. So my total length is just under 4 inches. The end hole is a 1/2 inch from the end, and from the center of the end hole to the center of the pivot hole, I do have, looks like 3 3/16, just in case you don't have one to three 3/16, just in case you don't have one to reference. Now you got some measurements. This is for a 1949 Gottlieb College Days, so if yours is similar. I did have to drill these holes one size bigger. They were going to bind on the pin in the middle, so I just drilled them out one more size. A little bit more movement. I'll get that hammer together, get the springs on, and show you install in the game. There, I have the top one in and assembled. Seeing how it works. Let's put the bottom one together. As you can see, it functions the same, just a little bit different parts. So this is the old one we're not using anymore. I have the bottom one assembled with the spring on here already and the plungers ready. So I'm actually going to start. Already did this, but wash your hands before you touch anything on the top side of the playfield, like your flipper bats. Wash your hands. Now you may be saying, wait a second, this is the left flipper. On this game, it is not the left flipper, it is the right flipper. So first part, take the shoe, I'm going to put that in, take my shaft and key it into the shoe, and then I'm going to carefully screw this together. There. When assembling, you don't want to crank it too much. It's one of those things where flipper bats, not super cheap, but really make the game look nicer. So I'm going to put the rubber rings on right away, so I don't have to be wrenching on the playfield. And almost every manufacturer with 2-inch flippers recommends a double ring. It's probably not going to be in the original ring chart, but this is a 1-inch ring. Sort of stretching on off camera. There we go. That's what they recommend. It's going to prevent you from breaking out your flipper bats. Of course, not being from 1949 will also help. I'm going to install that in the playfield. I don't want this too tight up and down, but I don't want it to move out. So for right now, I leave like a 30-second space and just tighten one finger tight. To get these springs on is kind of a trick. I'm going to find the open side and open it just enough to get it over. I don't want to do it too much. Just enough to get it into the groove. And as you can see, action's pretty good. And I did end up finding some hairpins that look like they fit. And I'll show you what the top side looks like. As you can see, these are a little bit different flipper layout. They're not aligned. I wait until the game is powered up and functioning, and I got it in the actually the playfield in the game. At this point, they're just held in place. All the parts are there. So I am on the assembly portion. I'm waiting for a few more parts to be able to put this together. And I'm just going to give a little tip of EM repair. You always need a schematic, and if you look, the schematic is kind of a little bit dirty, and the problem is you need to reference this a lot, and I don't want to keep destroying the original schematic that came with it. Of course, if you don't have one, buy one from many online providers who offer either new or reproductions that are good and clean for either your game or a game very similar that you can still use. If I have an original, go to a copy shop, and I got a copy made so that I can mark it up, fold it, whatever I need to do. I'm not going to destroy the original, and they can even sometimes do cleanup depending on the software that's in their wide format copier. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more, please make sure you subscribe. Thank you.